I know there's always some jokesters out there, so just so you know, I have turned off my phone, so in case you're trying to call me in the middle of the service, it won't fully embarrass me. But we're in a week 3 of our series, Shocking Statements of Jesus, and I think the title is fairly self-explanatory. We're looking at the various statements that Jesus makes as you read through the Bible that sometimes make us take a bit of a step back because we have a certain understanding, a certain picture, a certain belief, and when Jesus says some of the things he does, you kind of pause and say, did Jesus really say that? And did he really mean that? And if he did, then what does this mean in my life? And so we're just kind of working through some of these statements, not to be quickly read through and then passed over and kind of let's get on to the other part, but to stop and to ask questions and to see, can we come to a better understanding as to what Jesus is wanting us to know through these comments that he makes? And so this morning we're going to look at one particular parable that Jesus tells. For me, one of the most challenging parables, first in terms of understanding what Jesus is actually talking about, and then challenging in terms of then knowing what Jesus is asking me to do. It's one of those parables that sometimes ignorance is bliss. But you start to see what Jesus is doing. And so to set it up a little bit, if you're not familiar with the way in which Jesus would often teach, is he would often use parables, which are essentially stories that are not true. Jesus would just make them up, and he'd use them to teach one specific thing. You know, they're often not that multifaceted. Some parables are really obvious. That is, Jesus is telling them, you're like, okay, I know where you're going for this. Thank you for the illustration. I really appreciate it. But parables primarily teach one thing. And then what Jesus would do is he would then use the parable to then bring it into everyday life. And so let's look at this parable of Jesus and begin to understand what exactly he's saying. Because to me, at first listen, at first read, it's one of those parables that is as clear as mud. But you guys are smarter and wiser than me, so we'll give you a crack at it.
I'm reading from Luke 16, verses 1 to 14, which is on page 79 in the New Testament of your pew Bibles. Jesus told his disciples, "There was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, 'What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' The manager said to himself, 'What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses.' So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' 900 gallons of olive oil,' he replied. The manager told him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Then he asked the second, 'And how much do you owe?' 1,000 bushels of wheat,' he replied. He told him, 'Take your bill and make it 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So, if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." The Pharisees, who loved money, heard all this and were sneering at Jesus.
You know, when I first thought of this series, it was actually this parable that I was thinking of. Because oftentimes you'll teach on parables and you'll handle parables that are oftentimes easier to deal with. And then you come across this one, which is often referred to as the shrewd manager. And you think, okay, Jesus, what are you trying to say here? I don't quite get it. And so you read it over and over and over again and try to come to a bit of a better understanding. Because the parable can be confusing at times, and it seems to be that at surface look that Jesus is actually commending someone that as you hear the parable being read, you kind of getting a little bit annoyed at. And so let's back up a little bit and kind of unpack this a little bit and try to come to a better understanding as to what Jesus is teaching and what does this mean for you and me sitting here today. Because Jesus tells the story of a rich man who is unhappy with his manager. Now, in a modern day context, this manager would be like a CEO, a CFO. And so this rich guy has a ton of money. And basically, he doesn't want to deal with his money. He wants someone else to oversee his entire estate. And so this manager would have been his right-hand guy. He would have dealt with buying, he would have dealt with selling, he would have dealt with investing, he would have made sure employees were being paid, he would have made sure that renters were paying their due. He was in charge of absolutely everything. And the owner, don't know where he was or what was going on, heard that his manager wasn't doing a good job. He was wasting his possessions. And so he calls him to the carpet and says, I know what you are doing. You're done. You're done with me. But there's a little interesting detail, and the detail is that he didn't show up with security and a box and say, put all your possessions in the box, you are being marched out to the front door. Rather, he seemed to give him a little bit of time. And this manager picks up on it. And maybe from reading this parable, now bosses do march you to the door because we realize what this guy does. He says, I have a brief moment where I have access to an incredible amount of resources. I better not mess this opportunity up. And so what does he do? He gets highly creative. He starts calling in all the people who owe his boss money. And typically what these people would have been paying was rent because they couldn't give money, and so they'd give product and resources. And so the first guy shows up and he says to him, listen, you owe my owner, my master, 800 gallons of olive oil. I really wanted to bring it in and show you what 800 gallons of olive oil would have looked like, but I think you get it. Modern day equivalent is that would have been 3 years of salary. So just think of how much money you make and realize that is the amount of debt that is owed. And you're called in, and this guy says, hey, let me see your bill. Let me see your bill. Cut it in half. Take a year and a half off your debt. You'd be like, this is amazing. Thank you so much. Oh, no. Don't thank me now. Thank me later. Out you go. Next guy, come on in. What, 1,000 bushels of wheat? Again, that would have been about 8 to 9 years of an average salary. So imagine your salary over 8 years, and he says, I'm going to cut it by 20%. Another year and a half taken off. You'd be like, this is so fantastic. Again, thank you so much. No. Don't thank me now. Thank me later. And it would have gone one after another. And so Jesus is telling the story, and you can probably start to feel just like, this is ridiculous, Jesus. What? Who would do that? And you'd think that Jesus is setting up the punchline for don't be dishonest, because this guy not only got fired, he then got thrown in jail, right? That's how I would have ended the story. But I'm not telling the story, so we'll go with Jesus' version. And so what does Jesus say? He says the owner arrives and commends the guy for being so shrewd. So the first thing I did after I read that line is I got a dictionary and tried to figure out what shrewd was. And it says, being wise, being crafty, being clever. I don't know about you, but in reading that, if you were there the very first time Jesus told it, you'd be thinking, Jesus, what? Why is this guy being commended? What is, he was dishonest. But what's interesting is what this guy actually did was he saw the resources available to him as leverage to set up an even greater reality. He saw it as an opportunity to use that which was before him to create something far lasting. Now, mind you, it was incredibly selfish, but Jesus doesn't let us get hung up on that point for very long. Because then Jesus continues by saying this. He says, the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than the people of the light. Essentially, the disciples are now thinking, whoa, wait a second, Jesus. You're now making this about me? Because what I believe Jesus is saying here is the people who don't follow me, the people who don't listen to me, the people who don't want to go in the direction that I am, are far better at understanding the principle of leverage than you guys who are spending all of your time with me. Because Jesus then illustrates. He says, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. And again, my response is, what is Jesus saying here? Use worldly wealth to make friends so that when I die, I'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings? What? Jesus, what are you talking about? What are you saying here? And I think as we begin to go back, we begin to land at this place of understanding. Jesus asking us the question, how are you using the resources that you have? Do you see it as leverage? Because it seems to be that Jesus is saying, listen, there can be an opportunity that when you die, when you come to heaven, you will have people coming up to you who will be welcoming you and thanking you that you may not even have any idea as to who they are. So imagine, I'll put myself in that position, that when I die, I go to heaven. And people come up to me and say, hey, Joel, it's great to see you here. Thank you so much. You just meant so much. And I'm thinking, Jesus, first of all, I thought that when I went to heaven, I would be perfect. And my mind on earth was not perfect. So why can I not forget this guy's name? Why can't I remember his name? And I'm like, I'm really sorry. I have no idea who you are. And the guy's like, well, you would have no idea who I am because we never actually met. Actually, I know you because there was a team that went from your church to Nicaragua. And they built a church in my village. And as a result, I started going to that church. And as a result of going to that church, I started to learn about Jesus. And I'm here now because of some of your contributions. So thank you. And after I step out of that conversation, this woman comes up to me and says, thank you so much. And again, I'm thinking, I have no idea who you are. She goes, well, no, you wouldn't. But remember that sports camp that you gave money to? See, my grandson went to that sports camp, and he enjoyed it so much that we decided, let's go check out the church that supported that sports camp. And so we went to the church, and we sat there for a Sunday or two, but we didn't stay in that church because the guy speaking week to week was a little kooky at times, and so we said, let's find a more reasonable church. And so we went to the Baptist church, and there we learned about Jesus, and we're here now because of that. And, oh, you were that guy. This is awkward. Sorry about that. But we're in heaven, so, thank you anyways. I believe what Jesus is saying is that we have an opportunity to look at our resources as leverage to build relationships, as leverage to build into God's kingdom. And we may not fully understand the impact of our decisions that we make for many years yet to come. You see, Jesus commended what this guy did because he saw that in a brief moment, He had an opportunity to use the resources in front of him. He was intentional and he was creative. And so as I read this parable, I begin to realize this parable is about me. This parable is about God asking me, am I being resourceful with the resources that I have at my disposal to leverage it for something far greater, for the building of God's kingdom? I believe this parable teaches us one of the most important truths about our resources, about our money, about our finances, is that in God's eyes, they're tools. They're tools to be used to build something far greater. Now, I know we're starting to squirm a little bit, thinking, gee, Joel, come on, you spoke about sex last week, money this week. I really can't wait till next week to see what you're going to lay on us. But Jesus is saying, how do you view the resources of this world? How do you view the stuff that you have? Do you see them as an opportunity, as leverage to build into something far greater? I often get asked this question. Since we have the New Testament, are we still expected to give a tithe? A tithe, if you're unfamiliar with kind of Bible speak, is 10%. And the arrangement was set up in the Old Testament, so the time before Jesus, that as God's people, God says, here is the deal. I am going to provide for all of your needs. I am going to give you 100%. And all I ask is that you find a way to live off 90% and then give me 10%. I mean, we start to look at it that perspective, who would not sign up for that? God is saying, I will give you everything. Just give back 10% to me. And so that was often the way in which it worked in the Old Testament. But then we get in the New Testament, and a couple things happen. Is one, we begin to see stuff as our stuff, and not so much as God's. And we think, well, Jesus never talks about 10%, so, do we really need to give 10%? And I'm thinking, Jesus isn't dealing with this 10% issue over here because we're missing something far greater. And that is a principle that goes all the way back to the Old Testament with Abraham in the book of Genesis, the very first book of the Bible. When God makes this covenant, this relationship, this agreement with Abraham, he says, I am going to bless you. I'm going to give you a lot of stuff so that you can use your stuff to be a blessing to others. And this is the principle that God delights in the midst of all of life, is that we will use our resources as an opportunity to bless others and to build God's kingdom. Because one of the dangerous things about the tithe principle, and I find myself falling into this camp, is that we think, okay, I will give you 10%. This is the 10%. I'll give it to the church. I'll give it to other ministries. There's your 10%, God. Now I got 90%. And if someone comes asking for the other 90%, I'm like, whoa. I already gave the 10. Don't ask for 11. Don't ask for 12. Don't ask for 13. I gave the 10. And you have certain things in your life that when some people ask for it, you're like, I don't know if I want you to use that. I don't know if I want to share that. And Jesus is saying, do you see all of your life as an opportunity for ministry? Do you see all the resources that you have as an opportunity to build into my kingdom? Because there's certain things that we hold on to that we kind of want to hold on to. Certain things that we don't want to get broken by others. Yet it happens too often. I'll tell you one other story. When some of this started to make more sense to me, is oftentimes stuff and possessions are not only a tool, but they're a test. They're a test to see just if you get God's principle or not. And a couple of years ago, I'm able to tell this story now because it's been a couple of years. Healing has taken place in my life, so we're in a good place on this. Someone asked to borrow my golf clubs. I thought, all right, sure, God stuff. This is not my stuff, God. This is your stuff. And so here, absolutely, you can use my golf clubs. Have a great round, right? A couple days later, person brought my clubs back, and I was like, oh yeah, how was the game? How was the golf game? Oh, it was good. Yeah, we had a lot of fun. It was a great time. I'm looking at my bag, and I'm like, I'm 3 clubs short, man. Where's my putter? Where are my other 2 clubs? Like, how do you lose golf clubs? That was like the internal dialogue, right? And I get the clubs back, and I didn't say anything at the moment, and then after a while, I hear God like tapping me on my shoulder saying, hey, Joel, what's more important, your stuff or a relationship with this person? Are you going to go off on them? I'm like, Jesus, you don't want to know the answer to that. You know what I want to do. And then I got thinking, God works in mysterious ways. Maybe he's telling me, don't golf anymore, Joel, because you're not very good at it. But our possessions can be a test. They can be a tool. As Jesus continues by saying this. He says, no servant can serve 2 masters. You cannot serve both God and money. What Jesus does is he kind of blows the doors off this understanding of stuff. Brings us into a place of saying, do you see everything that you have as an opportunity to build his kingdom? Do you see your car? Do you see your house? Do you see your possessions? Do you see everything that you own as being an opportunity to build into the lives of others? Because when you do, you have no idea, but you may be positioning them to have a greater understanding of God. It means we don't begin to compartmentalize our life. I said this last week, but one of the defining realities of the early church was that they were seen as being incredibly generous with their possessions, that this became a marker to others. We see it validated in 2 Corinthians when we read these words, when the Apostle Paul is speaking to them. We'll pull it up on the screen. It says, your gifts meet the needs of God's people. And a lot of times we think, you know what, I give because it helps others. But then Paul says, and that's not all. Your gifts also cause many people to thank God. Because of your generosity, people are praising God. I talk a lot about how God values partnership. And one of the great ways that this is played out is by God blessing us in a variety of ways. So some of us may have a lot more stuff than others, and there's an opportunity to be a blessing. Others may have less stuff, but there's still opportunities to be a blessing. You see, it's interesting. We run through this cycle of stuff, and I'm sure all of us are in various stages of it. When we're kids and when we're growing up and we finally grow up and leave our parents' houses, we don't have a lot of stuff to take with us. And the stuff that we do have, our parents are more than happy to send along the way. Right? They turn your bedrooms into offices or sewing rooms. They threaten you with stuff like, if you don't take this box home, Joel, it's going to be on the curb. And I'm like, where's the compassion, folks? I'm your son. But then you get older and you realize that you start to build your own stuff and you buy houses and you fill it with stuff and then you have kids, and I'm not there yet, but when they leave, their stuff is leaving with them. And then as you get older, you look around at the house and you think, wow, I don't need all this stuff. Why do I have all this stuff? It's called downsizing. And so you downsize. And I wonder, Jesus is looking down on us and thinking, Just go to Luke 16, read that parable. You'll save yourself a lot of hassle. Do you need all that stuff? Or do you see it as an opportunity for ministry? You see, this is what's so amazing about Jesus, is he leaves the principle with us and says, get creative. Look at everything you have, as much or as little, and get creative and see them as opportunities to build my kingdom. There's absolutely no guilt laid on in this. It's not like if you live in a big house or you drive a nice car or you have all these things that then there's a lot of guilt laid on us. It's Jesus saying, you know what, if you have that house, are you using it to build relationships? Are you using it to build my kingdom? Will you allow me to access it when I may need it? And suddenly it means for me that this is a constant working out in all of life. As I begin to see everything that I have that God has access to, and that God may want me to use to build not my little kingdom, but to build His. And when I do, not only are people's needs being met, but the generosity of God is lived out. Just imagine if we continued to be a church that was so generous in this community, that as individuals we were seen as so generous. People would say, I may not agree with everything that this Jesus guy you talk about has to say. I may not agree with it all. But I want to know more. Because if I see you being this generous with your things when I know I can't do it on my own, there must be something there. Because to be generous in the way that God calls us to be is not about being guilt into it. It's not about trying harder. It's about looking at this as a partnership and as an opportunity that God is going to walk alongside us as He says, will you use your stuff, which is really His, as managers to build His kingdom? Because when we do, we have no idea the people we may meet in heaven, the people who will be there because of our willingness to be generous in this short period of time. 80, 90, 70 years, however long we live, is a short period of time in comparison to reality. And I want to walk into heaven high-fiving people that I never knew, hoping that maybe my generation, my generosity, helped get them there. Please stand as we sing together.